Hello and welcome to SciLux, the podcast where we talk about scientific developments and technological changes in Luxembourg. And in today's episode, our guest is Dr. Ina Ganschow. Ina is a research scientist at C2DH, so the Centre for Contemporary and Digital History. Her research interests include contemporary history of Luxembourg, Russian emigration to Luxembourg from 1914 to present day, and most recently Soviet Ostarbeiters and prisoners of war in Luxembourg during the Second World War. She is also one of the initiators of LURN, Luxembourg Ukrainian Researcher Network, and on top of all this, she is a fellow journalist. Hello, Ina. Thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you for having me here.
So let's start with LURN. How did it start and what is it about?
So LURN is our Luxembourg Ukrainian Researcher Network. How did it start? It started with the war. It started with volunteering activities in Germany and in Luxembourg. It started with meeting a lot of Ukrainian people and especially Ukrainian researchers. I think I was looking for them because, you have this professional solidarity. I was always looking for the students, scholars, musicians. I said, that's my environment in Luxembourg, so that's where I can help people to find connections. And at a certain point, you just realize people are also coming not only through me to University of Luxembourg, but also through other faculties. We had different fellowships and programs which were created for the scholars in Luxembourg. And it was just a natural development, I guess. When you have a bunch of people and then you realize you know all of them, but they don't know each other, that's your natural next step to say I can introduce you to someone. You might be interested. And I think as a migration researcher, you just know that that's how the diaspora life actually works. Diaspora, that's not people living abroad. If you have a bunch of nationals, expats living somewhere, it's not a diaspora. Diaspora is always about structures. You need a school, you need a church, you need a cultural center, and maybe you need a researcher network. As long as you have a structure, that's how the diaspora life is actually going to stay alive. And that's, on the other side, this is also the opposite direction actually for integration. Because integration means that we don't have diasporas. We have people who are somehow either assimilated or accommodated. There are different terms and different appearances in migration research where you can actually make people which came from outside part of the inside landscape. So introducing people to each other, seeing that we have a lot of Ukrainian researchers, much more than it's visible to us. So you talk to your colleagues, having coffee somewhere in the little kitchenette on your corridor, on the floor. And then the idea was spontaneously born, I think, after the excursion I made for some Ukrainian researchers at the University of Luxembourg. We went through the campus in Belval. I was showing them the former camps of Soviet forced laborers and prisoners of war. Over the half of them were actually brought to Luxembourg from Ukraine. So we were going through these traces of former Ukrainian or Russian or Belarusian life here, seeing that actually there's no traces. If you don't know that something was happening here, you wouldn't actually suspect anything. And then you just have such a nice atmosphere, you don't want to stop it. You have a bunch of people, you had just a great time and an exchange. And there was a colleague, Marina Laurent, and then we also asked Martin Düring. So three of us were like, let's start, a little meeting where a little bit formal. So we actually ask people to come and present themselves and present their research. So that's for the early August that was planned. And this inaugurational meeting of LURN was also supported by our director of C2DH, by Andreas Fickers. He created us a little budget so we can, host people properly. And I think that was it. If you see people, that's mostly women. So it is kind of a sisterhood because men are not allowed to leave. So we do have some men, but they're mostly retired professors. We have some young men, but that's students or really like school kids. They're helping us out, but they're not part of this network. Listening to these women presenting their research coming from such different fields and institutions and sharing this academic life, because we thought that we are making them part of our academic life. But if you spend a day together, you realize that you became also a part of their academic life, because now you understand another topic, you're kind of interested in a different discipline. You start quickly to work, on networking, like in your head, but also connecting literally people. So we created an activity for the afternoon after everyone presented themselves, that we really started to sort the interests, because we didn't want to stay within the discipline, so within their faculty. So we wanted to find people who have similar interests and values, so that we create working groups. And the next activity this afternoon was actually, why don't you create a project like within 30 minutes, whatever. It's not a project which we have to conduct, but just to see, can you work together? You have common interests, but does it do something? And it was fascinating, I think, for everyone to see how in this absolutely emergency situation, for a day you can forget everything and do something where you're actually competent, but also where you can be curious about someone else's competences. So people were working in these groups. I mean, everyone was writing something, we distributed them through the rooms. And some of our rooms have transparent walls, so we were going around looking, happening anything here or not. And you see people are really working. They are, this post-its with the keywords. It's already on the wall, and they are planning and mind mapping something. I guess that went pretty well. So when I asked, so maybe that was okay, and now you know each other, you can keep in contact, but maybe we should meet another time. And they're like, yes, please, let's meet another time. And we all hoped, we were thrilled. It's like, yes, because we also wanted to repeat it. So everything was learning by doing. The initial idea was to create really a network, so people know each other. And then as soon as we understand that what the interests and areas are, that we start to look for partners, for the Luxembourg scientists and scholars who are working on different disciplines in different research centers, so that we can make sure that first that we support or create and support this diaspora structure, that we have something especially for scholars, and that when the war is over, that the scholars can take something back. So, but that's again, being migration researcher and understanding how the diaspora works. So we are not there to integrate them in Luxembourg society. There are many structures doing this job and doing this fantastically, like Red Cross and Caritas. There are many different organizations taking care of their language skills and other integrational measures. We are there to support their return. We are there to make sure that when the war is over and they're returning, that they have connections, they have contacts, they received already fundings, they know people, they can create exchange programs for students, they can send their PhD students to conferences, they can publish something together. So we want to be the first ones when the war is over and they're back. And Luxembourg is already has everything prepared so that we can start right away with all the collaborative projects we can imagine. So that's actually our final goal. So to make sure that once it's over, because it's going to be over sooner or later, everything what was started will have an end. And I think with this LURN, maybe, creating this project, finding new forms of cooperation, it also gives them a better feeling that they're not wasting the time, but they're doing something. They're preparing for the academic future of Ukraine.
You mentioned many things that are so beautiful about science. Well, first of all, the connections, right? I remember when we talked about LURN earlier on, you were saying, even if it doesn't work out, even if the projects don't really bear fruit, at least we've created these human connections, human touch. And that's really, really important, I think. And another thing, it's a very futuristic way of thinking, isn't it? Just, you don't want to focus on now. You're saying, okay, in the future, when you come back, maybe we reconnect, or you have certain skills that you can use once you're back there. This is really interesting also because people tend to think in a maybe 5-year time frame, but not so much looking into the future.
Because, the more time they spend here, the more they discover the differences in academic culture of Ukraine and Luxembourg. So that the next meetings, after the first one, we started to create really tailored to the demands, seeing what are, the surprising parts of Luxembourg academic life here.
I have to ask you, what are the surprising parts?
Like you realize that the way you design your resume, your CV, it's just different. The way you write the motivation letter is different. The way you communicate on your emails, like do you have to send an email or can you use a corporative messenger? For what do we use what? So because translating into a different language actually doesn't do the job. There's a cultural translation which is needed, and that's how we started to ask our colleagues. So every time now we meet, we have two parts of the event. The first part we call skill development. So we asked recently a coach to come and to speak about how to set the goal and what business model would be, how does it look to use to achieve this goal. Because some of them might be self-employed soon. At the moment, I think for the most of them, they have fellowships and they were prolonged, but that it will have probably the end soon. So just in case they're playing with the thought to be freelancer or self-employed. So a coach was speaking about business modeling and goal setting. We also asked a colleague to come and speak like how we usually create our CVs. So what do we expect when we tell someone, please send me your CV. So how many pages does it have to be? What kind of picture would be appropriate in this country to use? Do you use a picture at all? What kind of private information you should reveal and which not? So you realize that indeed in different countries people are used to do this differently. There's nothing about bad or good or right or wrong. It's mostly about different traditions, and they will find it out sooner or later themselves. But we can help them to find this out actually quicker. So, and in the second part of the event, so we always ask other people, we call it opportunities, to come and introduce working groups, the professional networks, other opportunities which are maybe close to academia but might be outside of the university life. That's also interesting, so that they realize be a scholar is not necessarily actually to work at the university. Luxembourg and the countries around also offering this. And also this understanding that Luxembourg is actually a country within this bigger structure, like greater region, and Germany and France and Belgium should be always actually included in everything what you are doing. So always consider and be ready to move. So that's also this high mobility we have here as a given, not really actually part of academic life in Ukraine, at least for the scholars we have to do with. And this is also a enrichment for us, because if we want to create these partnerships and hope to have common projects later, we're also learning. We're learning how they do this, because at a certain point they might be giving us classes. Okay, if you work in Ukraine with us, make sure you do this and that. Please don't do this. And so that's a very enriching bilateral process. And we're actually about to grow. So the word was spread, like people start to know that, Luxembourg has this Ukrainian Researcher Network. So people in Belgium and the Netherlands were interested whether we would like to try a Benelux LURN edition. We'll probably try to have one of these meetings online or on site, depending on how far people are and are they willing to travel to Luxembourg or not. And then we'll see. So it might be that we'll start a bigger thing.
So there was nothing like that in Belgium or the Netherlands?
No. And we had colleagues in France asking like, we heard, how did you do this? Because we are playing with the thought. It's like, yes, we already have experience, we can share. There's also some colleagues in Great Britain doing something similar, but not exactly. So we're like, okay, we're not trying to get the best people and keep them for us. In opposite, we're trying to always pre-work for the future and make sure that all this knowledge, all this experience, everything what they learn and get here, that they'll take this with them.
What about the research interest? You mentioned that you clustered them a little bit. So what are the Ukrainian researchers based here in Luxembourg interested in?
So when we created these groups at the beginning, it was probably more like team building event. So from the 6 groups, I think we created 2 set after this meeting, like probably not going to work. So it doesn't look like that. But 4 of the groups, I think when it was time to apply for certain fundings, like the Marie Skłodowska-Curie for Ukraine, so 12 of our Ukrainian fellows applied for the individual projects. So we don't have collective projects yet, but they were mostly about the European integration of Ukraine. It was about the financial and economical help and growth after the war. We had also, in terms of languages, philologists, translating, and cultural translation, a group. So that where we realized people are really sticking together. So, yeah, again, individual projects were reached in and we are waiting for the answers. But there are also several people who are considering a startup, because Lux Innovation and Елизавета Шляхова, she is our curator. She was also recently talking to our researchers from Ukraine, explaining that if they have a startup idea, that actually everything is prepared for them to help them to make it happen. Let's make it happen, right? So we have a kindergarten, Ukrainian kindergarten, which is developed as concept, and we see that it's going to be a startup. And then we have also another business idea. I think it's more connected to furniture production and wood expert. So we see how it's going to happen there. So there is something happening. This network is, if people don't start to get positions right away, it's only because it was never intended. We are not providing jobs. We are providing connections. We are showing people how we do this, hoping that we do it right, and they can learn from this. And then, so the next step, so the last meeting was already prepared partially by the Ukrainian researchers. So the idea is that at a certain point, we are there if we are needed, but we are not organizing this, not planning this, not conducting this. The last meeting was also combined with a Ukrainian Christmas party. So there was Ukrainian live music played and the Ukrainian dishes were prepared. And we had a great moderator, Oksana Karbashevska. We were like, oh my goodness, if she can stay and moderate every meeting, so it's already great. And Ludmila Momochuk was very involved in the planning and communication with the speakers and arranging of this program that everything works, and it worked beautifully. And Olga Krivets was the responsible for the dinner party. And so everyone was absolutely happy.
So I got you very excited, and now I'm going to get you excited probably as well, because we're moving on to your research. And you mentioned actually already when you were discussing LURN that there was something related to your research. So what are you focusing on right now?
So the current project actually grew out of the previous project. So the topic of this one is the forced labors from Soviet Union. And we are speaking about the Second World War, particularly from 1942 until 1944, until the liberation. And then I'm also following their fates and lives in the post-war time. So this project has 3 years to be completed and finished up with a book. I am now in the year 2. So the first year was the material collection. The second year is the analysis. That's where I'm now. And the third year is the book production. So I have to start writing soon.
In January or not?
Okay, the project started in May, so we are counting the years from May to May. So I have a little time until May. And then so I'm writing and publishing some articles, and but the book production is happening soon. This project is financed by the Ministry of State. So I'm a researcher at the University of Luxembourg, but financial support is from the Ministry of State and the Service de la Mémoire. This is Patrick Majerus, who is the head of the service. So the Soviet forced labors, which I'm analyzing, so reconstructing their life here, that was partially described in my previous book, which appeared 2020. This is 100 Jahre Russen in Luxembourg, so that's 100 years of Russian in Luxembourg. And the subtitle was the history of a atomized diaspora. So my research question back then was, how did it happen that we don't have a proper diaspora in Luxembourg, that we don't have a coherent community of Russians in Luxembourg? So that being myself migrated from Soviet Union, so my family came 30 years ago, and also observing other people coming from previous Soviet Union or post-Soviet republics being Russian-speaking, I was wondering how people have always the idea they're the first ones. Many of them were saying, like, when I arrived, nobody was there. And I already knew that that's not true, because the book before, which I published, was about the history of Russian Orthodox Church in Luxembourg, which was built by the Tsar army or their families after the October Revolution in 1917. Most of them came here in the 20s, and they started the so-called Russian Orthodox life here. And when I was working on this research, so already back then, asking different local archives and national archive about what traces of the Russian life they have here. So I started to get all this information about the prisoners of war and the forced laborers from Soviet Union. So that was the first discovery. I was like, oh my goodness, there were other people here beside this group of migrated anti-communists, Tsar army. And I wanted to read something about this. But there was no book to read, so I'm mostly writing books I would like to read. So there was no book there, and I couldn't integrate this in the history of the church. But that's how I actually started to collect more material, which led me to this book about the history of the entire 20th century and all the movements coming either from the Russian Empire, Soviet Union, or Russian Federation. That research was financed by Lydia Schmidt Stiftung and Ben Fayot. So that's the history where Soviet forced laborers and prisoners of war were integrated was a part of this. So that was a chapter. And that's how the current project started. So people asked me to elaborate this and to complete it as a bigger research. So looking at these Soviet citizens and trying to reconstruct their life here. So you really have to understand that every group of people which was in Luxembourg called Russians, if you take them under the, how do you call this, magnifying glass?
Yes.
You realize that the only thing they had in common was the passport. So either they were all citizens of the Russian Empire, or they were all citizens of the Soviet Union, or maybe now they're citizens of the Russian Federation. And even then we already have a problem, because that's how the Luxembourg administration always counted people by passports. But that's partially also answering my research question back then. Why don't we have a coherent Russian diaspora? Because there were no coherent Russians. So every group which was coming from a different region of Russia, and they had different motivations. They had different intentions. And if you look even closer, then you realize not everyone spoke Russian as a mother tongue. When I look at the group of the forced Soviet laborers, by the material, different sources I could collect in Ukraine, in Russia, in Luxembourg, in Germany, in France, and in the United States, I can see that 4,000 people who were repatriated from Luxembourg can be reconstructed almost completely by names. But this is actually not exactly the purpose of the research. It's not about a reconstruction. Otherwise, I could prepare just an exhibition or, a website. So there's a research question. And the easiest way to analyze something is to compare. So I was asking myself, so who do I compare the Soviet forced laborers to? And there was no evidence, like, why should I compare them with the German ones, or with the Belgian ones, or with the ones who were brought to France? Because you need a criteria somehow to select, right? So I didn't have any. Like, if I compare them to the German ones, to which ones? To the Soviet laborers were in Trier. So is it geographically? What should be the criteria? So I finally finished up with the idea that I'll be comparing them with the local population. Because in Belleval, where we had in general in the south of Luxembourg, where we had the most camps, there were prisoners of war camps. So that's male camps, and they're differently guarded. There's a different life in these camps. And also the camps with the civil forced laborers, that's mostly women and mostly from Ukraine and mostly under 20. So we're dealing with female teenagers. That the fact that they were living and working at the same time, at the same place with other young is actually inviting me to go in this direction. So there is no book on the life of Luxembourg working youth in Luxembourg. So I guess I have to write this as well. So I have to combine and compile all the information I can get to reconstruct the normal working life in the south of Luxembourg, so that I can compare it with working youth from Soviet Union.
This is definitely something that I love hearing about Luxembourg, is that very often the researchers tell me, oh, I was first. It was completely nobody ever studied this. And this is in a way very positive, isn't it? At the same time, you really have nothing to compare with. And that must be very, very tricky. And the second thing I wanted to say is more related, of course, to the pub quiz question that normally appears a bit earlier in the podcast. But well, we've been talking for long about other things. So now I think it's the time to move on to the question, also because it's a bit related to what you've just mentioned. So can you please ask the question? And of course, listeners, the answer to this question will be only at the end of the podcast. So please listen until the end.
The question is, how many children did we have here from Soviet Union?
Interesting question. With this time, we have a guest who remembered not to answer the question during our discussion. So remember, the answer will be only at the end of the podcast. And also, coming back to what you said about the camps, you said, well, of course they were in Bilbao. To be honest, I don't know much. So yes, tell me, how was it all placed? How did it work? And of course, what was the labor? Steel, I assume?
As much as I have the data now, so I have to remind you that my research is still ongoing. It's not completed. So don't come with a finished book and say, like, you mentioned in your interview something else. So as much as I see now in the data I collected, most of those people, like over the half, were brought from Ukraine. Around a quarter was from Belarus and another quarter from what's contemporary Russia. Most of those people were young and female, and they were not qualified workers. So we are dealing with school kids and some students, some farmers. What might be interesting that most of them are also coming from certain regions. Like a very large group, actually the largest one, is coming from Donbass, actually from Luhansk. And the calculation was, I guess, since this is an area where coal mining is a traditional or current activity, that these people are either trained to work in mines or through the family, through the other workers in the family, understand how it works. So then when I see what we have left in the documentation of Arbet or Differding Stahlwerke AG, the biggest steel mills and employers in the region, that they were not really suitable to work in mines. So what finally happened, the prisoners of war, the male adults from Soviet Union were used to work in mines. The civil forced laborers were used mostly in the steel mills, but above the surface, not in the mines. The university is sitting on the site of steel mill. And every day, like, the students are coming to classes. So the Luxembourg workers were coming to work, and also the Soviet youth was also coming to work. And we know exactly where the female camp was, and we know how this way looked like, that they had to walk, and that they were wearing these wooden shoes, which are actually to be worn in the halls where the hot ovens are working. But I guess as a punishment, or maybe sometimes because of the lack of other shoes. So they were walking with these wooden shoes to the camp and back, which is around 2 kilometers. And we have also records of sick people because of the damaged feet and infections and so on. So the steel mills, the mines, so mostly we are dealing with camps in the south. And what I see now in the data I could collect by now, another half was spread through the farms in Luxembourg. Of course, all these people are called Russians, but we are back to the previous research. This is the way people called looking at their passports. So we don't see Soviets, but we see Russians. But if you look at the date of birth and place of birth and the region they came from, you realize that also by their last names, you can recognize that that's actually Ukrainian or Belarusians, 75% of these people, but they're still called Russians. You could also become a forced labor from East, even not coming from Soviet Union. We had a Russian colony here, that's the Tsar army, which arrived in the 20s, and people who didn't want to collaborate with the Germans, with the German occupational administration, they were also transferred or assigned to this title. So you can become an Ostarbeiter if you were born in Russia, never lived in Soviet Union, but now you are not collaborating with the Germans. So you can become a forced labor from the East. So that's what I've seen in several cases. But we also had cases where people were collaborating and then they were used as a translators and guards in the camps. And there are also different stories about good ones and bad ones, taking care of them and really not behaving.
When we were preparing for this interview today, I contacted you and you said, well, I'm in Washington right now. And I thought, yeah, probably visiting friends or something like that. And you were like, no, I'm in the archives and you won't believe what I've found. So yes, tell me, what did you find?
So I found the documentation from the American Army, which was keeping records. It's really like daily life of Luxembourg and the American occupational administration, if we can call it, from the September 1944 until 45, 46. I managed to go through the fall 1944. I'll have to return to continue going through the 1945, but that's what was missing. Since the war in Ukraine, I'm not going to Russia anymore. I'm also not contacting Russian archives, and this is the price we are paying for taking this position. And knowing that I lost some sources, so I was hoping to, to continue working with Ukrainian sources because we have an NGO there, After Silence, and this Ukrainian NGO is specialized on recording memories of former Ostarbeiters, this for Soviet laborers, and they helped us after the war started. So I couldn't go to Ukraine as well. So, but they helped us to find some people. So we were placing advertisements in the newspaper. Saying like University of Luxembourg is looking for the Ostarbeiters from Luxembourg. And we were printing photographs and documents and people started to call back. So we could collect several interviews. Nobody is alive. I was hoping because they were so young, these people, that maybe some of the children are still alive. No, we didn't find anyone by now, and since the big refugee wave, we might also lose someone because people are not there anymore. But when one door closes, other opens. So the American Archive is actually covering a huge part of my research questions. So everything what I wanted to know, it's there. It's documented. It's a lot of looking for a needle in the hay. What's the expression, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But at least now I see the hay. So I see this where I have to look for. So it's really like on daily basis, different units were reporting on different parts. It's public health, it's transportation, banking, a displaced person, Soviet forced laborers. I was like, yes, that's what makes a researcher excited. Not meeting with friends, but yes, finding what you were looking for.
And not writing the book afterwards.
That's a part which is not that exciting. It is, I would call it differently. It's really getting you, it's a time machine. It's entering a time machine. It might be exciting, but that's not a carousel. That's not a, how do you call this?
Roller coaster.
Roller coaster, yes. It's not this. It's something else. It's mostly, I have the feeling that I'm really like, I'm not digging because digging it's an active part. No, something is soaking me in. So I'm just disappearing in a different epoch. And also that's probably my journalist education and experience. If I write, I'm always interested in things which might be not relevant for science. But I always striving to tell the history through concrete lives. This micro-historical level, I think, allows us to understand better what happened with millions of people. If we can describe maybe one family, say like that's pretty much average. But then you need certain details, like this wooden shoes. Okay, what else? What kind of clothing? What kind of underwear? We're dealing with women if they are pregnant, if they have the monthly periods. So, and then you start to find this evidence, like, oh, someone was sterilized, someone was pregnant. Where are the children? Are they born? And then you see, oh, there's on the cemetery, there are some little children, and then you realize, oh, that's not the newborns. They're like 1 and 3 years old. Did they come with mom? Were they born here? And then you always try to imagine and find out, like, what kind of not only material world was around you, but it's also that's a different understanding how people are treating each other. So it's before we had the Convention on the Human Rights. It's before the all the standards and values we have. So the measurements with which you actually judge or not judge is also I don't know, at a certain point has to be adjusted. The relationship between children and parents, the relationship between men and women, among rich and poor, workers and the landlords. So for me, that's all relevant. I want to be able, if not describe this detailed, but to have this understanding at least for myself, so that what I'm telling you something, oh, I know what I'm talking about. It's not fantasized. It's not assumed. It's known.
What I personally find very interesting in your research and your colleagues at C2DH, or in general historians, that it's very much about connecting the dots. So you find the archives and then they start to speak to you, but you're going through, it's kind of like this figuring it out yourself. But I also know that nowadays you're working on some projects that were about recording oral history now as it is happening. So all these testimonies. And then you are tagging it and you're preparing and indexing. And then I was just wondering, I mean, aren't you just basically taking away all this excitement from the future generations of historians?
Oh, I wish someone would prepare something for me, that I would have this archive of oral history, where all my Ostarbeiters are, telling me what happened and how they felt. So now that's what we're doing with our current project, the Witnessing the War. This is the project where we have 4 countries participating: Ukraine, Poland, Scotland, and Luxembourg. Machteld Wenken, our professor for migration and Luxembourgish history, she's coordinating and leading this project on the Luxembourg side. It is a volunteer project. We don't have any funding. I think the only person, so we're 7 volunteers and only one person, that's a Ukrainian fellow. She's officially employed at this project. So we are recording the witnesses of this war, and we don't have any criteria who is coming. Actually, everyone who is willing to talk is welcome. So if someone listening and you have Ukrainian friends who would like to share the story, so we record the stories indeed for the future generations. So if a historian 30 or 100 or 130 years later would like to write about this war, especially about the refugees, especially about the ones coming to Luxembourg, so we hope to reunite all 4 archives which are in this project, so that they'll find everything they're looking for. Of course, we're doing this the way we would like someone to do it for us. So we record this interview. We have all these legal disclaimers. We protect the personality. So it's not really anonymized, but it's pseudonymized. And the reason is people have the right to withdraw this interview from the archive later. And if we anonymize this, we won't be able to find the interview. But as long as they have a pseudonym, like a number, if they come a year later, say, like, can you please delete it from the archive? We can find this and delete. So the questions we are asking, they also were proven by our ethical committee of the University of Luxembourg. Certain things we cannot ask, except people would like to talk about this themselves. Religion, sexual orientation, whatever. But other things we're asking, we're inviting people to share how they've experienced this war, beginning with the preparation. It was on TV. There were Russian tanks at the borders, so people were talking about this. So how it started? Did they believe that it's gonna really be that bad the first day? How they heard or knew that it's begun, and so on, and the decision to leave, and why Luxembourg, and what now, and what after. Some people talk for 30 minutes. We are also asking volunteers who were helping Ukrainians here in Luxembourg to come and to share their view on this, also to tell their story. And some people, I had an interview, it was almost 4 hours. And that's why we need other instruments. Beside the recording, we can record the interview. But what do we do later with this? If you are going to write now about this collection, you cannot listen to that many hours of interviews, because that's not 1, not 10, and it probably won't be not even 100, it will be more. And in other countries participating on this project, this is definitely already more. So we use different digital instruments to help to navigate through this collection. So nobody else has the access at the moment to this collection, only the researchers who are recording, transcribing, or indexing this collection. So the part with the access, we are negotiating this with the ethical committees and GDPRs. That's all the regulations which need to be done. So we have a biogram. It looks like an Excel spreadsheet. So where you can put all the basic information about actually the person you're interviewing. Gender, age, social status, profession, professional activities, because it might be different to your education, married, not, children, so that we had a profile of who is actually speaking. So that's will be one database. This database is disconnected from the collection of the interviews, which exist as audio files. There's no videos, it's only audio. And there's no personal information recorded on this interview. So if someone gets to the database with the biograms, they wouldn't know what the people told us. If they get to the collection where people are telling their stories, they wouldn't know who is speaking, because it's not recorded. And we have smart machines helping us to transcribe it, like the HappyScribe. So that took a while, but we have a special agreement that our data are protected. If we upload an audio file to HappyScribe, HappyScribe is delivering within 30 minutes a full transcription. And if you want to go through the full text, you can just do the full text research. Put the word you're looking for, Kiev or Warsaw. What are you writing about? What do you want to analyze? Childhood, right? So, and then you'll find where the word is mentioned. But many things are not said. They're meant. And for this to see what meant people, what did they want to tell us, and just didn't really say it in words. So that's where we have the indexing, and this is a CAT TV. That's the program we are working with, our Media Lab, and Alexander Germain, our dear technician. He's helping us to manage this collection, and to index, you probably could also use a machine like a Mollet for topic modeling. But topic modeling, it's for huge collections where you have like millions and billions of words, and you have to know how are they related to each other. In this type of collections, we know what the people are talking about. We have an idea because we ask them pretty much the same questions. But we want to see what did they feel, what did they mean, and that's where you probably need a human. So the human is actually reading a fragment in the transcription or listening to this, and can say it's actually about pain of leaving the house. Because the person might not mention the word pain or the house. It might be a description of how they were riding in the taxi to the train station. But if someone later wants to see what topics were mentioned, so that's why we create this indexing system. So it's we had 2 or 3 conferences together with the Polish colleagues and Ukrainian colleagues, and we had also recently an online participation from Scotland. That's the St. Andrews University. So, and you see how differently you can work on the same task. Because we are doing this parallel, so we are doing this within one project, but we are not doing this like together, but next to each other. And every time when we meet and try to coordinate and say like, how you do this, how we do this, like we're not allowed to ask this, like why are you not asking this? Because we are. So, and then like who is going to get the access? In what language should this collection exist? It's unbelievably productive and creative situation, and you see it sounds bad, but this war created so many beautiful connections between people. like we are losing people every day. And at the same time, you see how this movement, this forced migration is creating new connections, new relationships, and beautiful new things which starting to live and will be having fruits later, I'm sure.
That's so positive that I find it very difficult to right now move on to the pub quiz question and solve it because, well, the subject of this question was definitely less positive, but well, that's the time right now. So Ina, can you please repeat the question and then tell us what the answer was?
The question was how many children among these forced laborers we had in Luxembourg between 1942 and 1944. So by now, by the data I collected now, there are 120 children in very different age, but all under 14. And the most of them were also workers. We didn't have any kindergarten or schools for these children. They couldn't stay alone in the camp. They were supposed to work with the parents as much as they could. So walking to the steel mill and back was certainly on the daily basis for sure.
Wooden shoes, maybe, as well.
Maybe that's actually also a good question. We have a lot of nice, touching stories about how the local population was actually helping them. I think people felt pity for them. If you think about these Ukrainian girls coming, they are born in the late 20s or early 30s. They survived Holodomor, this great famine in Ukraine. So they were malnutritioned and very undeveloped physically. They were small and tiny, and they didn't look like proper workers. So we have stories of helping them with the food and with the clothing. And also we have several stories about the trading food for wooden toys. And that's mostly men. So we suppose that it were the prisoners of war rather than the civil forced laborers, which were creating this dynamic mechanical wooden toys. We had recently also an Asian exhibition where this toy was exhibited. And it was usually it's also the male activity, creating with a knife something from wood to play with, which is also taking us back to the question, like how different the survival mechanisms are among women and men. So we don't have any stories like women were going through the houses trying to trade something. They could crochet something, some serviettes or whatever, but we don't have the stories. It probably was not safe for the women to go through the streets, so there were men. So men could create something and trade for better food. The survival mechanism for women, what they traded to get more food, to be researched. Yeah. Stay tuned.
I will invite you again to talk about it for sure. So it was a good kind of a teaser for the next episode when we meet. But for now, if listeners want to connect with you, if they are Ukrainians living here, maybe they want to participate in LURN or anything else, where can they find you?
You'll find it on the website. Just Google me, Ina Ganshow. You can also Google LURN, LURN. If you know Ukrainians, which are researchers, teachers, students, artists, they are welcome to contact us, certainly to come to meet and see how we conduct our meetings. If some of them are ready to share their stories, we would be happy to record it. It's very anonymously. They can pick the language. And if you know someone in Luxembourg who knows something about the Ostarbeiters, please find me as well and share what you have. Because there are some photographs and wooden toys and many other things I am always curious in.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a great appeal. So I guess anyone interested will definitely contact you. Ina, it was a pleasure to have you here today on our show. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
And this is it for today. A very tricky show, as you might have noticed, at least from the teasers. I lost my voice while talking to Ina, which meant that I had to re-record or change certain things so that it would sound kind of normal to you, because otherwise I guess you would be all in pain listening. Ina had to suffer actually for 40 minutes. So once again, sorry Ina, but at the same time, thank you so much for being such a great guest. Don't forget, as usual, to subscribe, to follow us, to rate us. Come on guys, why aren't you rating the podcast? Whatever comments are always welcome. And yes, I also have to say that we are now on Instagram. So if you prefer that social media, go and check us out. And of course, Twitter, LinkedIn, or just a traditional email and Buzzsprout account too, RTL Play. Find us there as well. This was Silax, and my name is Hanna Siemaszko. Don't forget, we are as usual powered by Research Luxembourg.